So this is the formal beginning. Welcome to everyone who's here with us on Zoom, and welcome to those watching on Facebook, and to anyone who is watching this in the future. This will be a short meeting. I'm closing one course tomorrow and opening another on Thursday, so I realized that I need time to take care of myself. But I do have very interesting plans, I think, for the future, which I will share with you as soon as things become clearer in all the channels where I share information. So I called this meeting, which is part 23 of the series, What Makes Our Inner Work Work, Vital Journaling. And I call it vital journaling for two main reasons. First of all, because as a rule, you know, there are always exceptions. It seems that journaling in some way is pretty vital for the success and depth of our inner work. Of course, there are, again, always exceptions, but as a rule, I highly recommend it. So that's one of the reasons why I called it vital. The other is because one of the possible gifts of ongoing and lifelong journaling can be a growing vitality. You know, as we dive again and again into the material, into what we've written in the past, into what we've written yesterday even, it's as if we're diving again and again into the streams and the oceans of our mysterious evolution. And we enable ourselves to be much more nourished by the work that we've done. Okay, so just doing it once is great. Of course, it's much better than not doing it at all, naturally. But if we do it, we re-experience it again and again, then the nourishment grows, and we'll be talking about it a little bit today. If you feel like it, you're really welcome to write in the chat, whether in Hebrew or in English, why you think journaling is important, or why do you resist it, or why do you think it's not important, or anything you have to say about it. It can be very nourishing for this conversation that we're having. So if you have anything to say, please write it in the chat. Now, I've been journaling on and off, amazingly enough, since I was in second grade. It's really weird. And little by little, it became something that I did more and more. You know, with years where I didn't do a thing, and years where I journaled a lot. But nowadays, it's really a very rare day that I don't work in my work journal. Very rare. And the writing itself is not a chore for me today. It's so nourishing and so rewarding that it's something that I wait for. Usually, of course, there are always exceptions, as we said. It's something that it's a meeting with myself. It's a meeting with all sorts of very deep sources within me. It's a meeting with all sorts of various types of guides and other things. And it's all amazingly not only useful on a day-to-day basis, but also really pleasant. It brings me a lot of joy, even though sometimes, of course, it's hard work and it can be pretty challenging at times. So it's really a rare day that I don't work in my work journal. And the writing itself, or the drawing, or whatever form our journal can take, is in itself, the act of writing is in itself really important, because I think it creates a much clearer, ongoing conversation with ourselves, with our inner parts and inner selves, with our guides, etc. Okay. Now, usually I try to bring things to this series that are from my very, very personal experience. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare in this case, so I just went to my many, many journals and I just picked one randomly. Who knows about randomness in our life, but and I just opened it. I swear it's just a random page 53 in one of my old journals. And I read it. I read a few lines. I have no recollection of this whatsoever. What am I trying to say before I read it to you is that if we don't write it down, the more and more we work, there is no chance, even if we have extremely good memories, there is no chance that we will remember all the valuable stuff that was there. And this is the major thing I want to discuss with you today. So let me read you just a little excerpt. The thing itself, I have no idea if it's relevant for today. I think it's just given me a very good idea for something else I'm going to do very soon, and which I'll tell you about when it's happening. But it's just a little excerpt that I didn't remember. So it begins, and I'm translating this as I'm reading from Hebrew, so please excuse me if it takes a few minutes. I'm very tearful, and I feel an unclear pain. What's actually happening? Can I talk with whoever feels this pain? It seems to me that I see a group of women wailing at the edge of a river. Ora, who are you wailing for? Everything, everything, Ora. We're wailing over life, over sweet, sweet life. Ora, I really don't understand. The sweet moments are so short, they say. Ora, what are those sweet moments? And they answer, of joy and health and love and the vitality of spring. Spring goes by so quickly. Ora, do you mean youth? Youth, happiness, joys, everything passes so swiftly. Ora, and that's what the pain is about? How youth and beauty are torn away from us, from within us. Or you're a collective personality, right? And they say, of course, we are the women wailing over spring. Ora, wow, thank you so much. Okay, and then it continues to other things. So maybe this came up because of the vitality. Now, once again, the main reason, at least the reason I'm conscious of bringing this part is simply because I just opened a journal and there was, as I said before, something that I never would have recalled unless it was documented, okay? And this perhaps isn't important, but perhaps is important, but for my future development, but definitely it was part of the tapestry of my self-discovery, both as an individual, as a part of humanity, perhaps, or of the world. So, as I said, the writing itself provides space for an inner conversation. that is extremely, extremely vital and nourishing. But it's also really important because of the sort of sacred time that we begin to allot in our daily routine. It's sacred time with ourselves, for the inner work. And of course, some of our inner work can happen in nature when we're shopping or when we're swimming in the sea or running or dancing or all sorts of other places. But when that's what happens, it's also really, really advisable to find time to remember it and to record it later in our journals. And really, for me, for example, this daily meeting with myself through journaling, sometimes it reminds me of a kind of ongoing pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage to myself, okay? It's something that really anchors the sacred work that I do with myself, usually in my case in the morning, but not necessarily, as a daily routine. Okay, and like so many sacred things, the ongoing and repetition of it is also very valuable for most of us. Now, when I'm talking of journaling work, I'm talking about having a journal. Usually, I prefer personally one journal for all the work, but I know some people prefer separate journals, one for dreams and one for writing work with inner selves and voice dialogue or any other way. And of course, there isn't one way that is right. But I must say that I used to separate things, and nowadays I don't. The reason is that it's all linked together, and there is no reason whatsoever in my work to separate the dreams from any other work, or separating all sorts of ideas that I've had during the night, for example, from working with collective fields of consciousness. For me, it's all the same thing, okay? And when I work, I can suddenly recall something from the past, and then I don't need to start, going from all, trying to search for it in all sorts of various places. But this is very personal, and each person will find the way that's best for you. So, as I said, what I'm talking about is, first of all, the work itself as we're doing it. And another thing is, I think during my life, I found it is very valuable to write a little bit about what's going on in your life as well. You know, I'm not talking about brushing your teeth in the morning, but I am talking about, what you're feeling generally, what's going on, because later in years to come, you might be very surprised to read, for example, how you used to feel 10 years ago. People don't remember who they were before. And this gives a very, very important perspective. And it also anchors the work that you do, in a little bit of, you had a very important conversation with a friend and you feel like mentioning it, and somehow the whole tapestry can be very valuable to look at in the future. So we discussed the difficulty of remembering. Now, the more I do my inner work, it becomes more and more complex in many ways. There are so many storylines. There are so many fascinating things going on. It's very difficult to hold all of this in our consciousness at one time. It really, really is. So again, this writing of it really helps recall important things. Now, the actual writing itself naturally makes it easier to recall, right? It's like listening to a lecture, for example, and the difference between just listening and then rushing to have a coffee, or writing a little bit while you're listening. Of course, again, this is very individual, but the act of writing helps us retain more of what what we're getting out of the work or out of listening to something, and so on and so forth. And I find it fascinating, both in myself and with other people, to see how much and how quickly a lot of the stuff that we don't write down disappears. For example, it's very often that when people do shamanic journeying, so they go on a journey, and something that I use as well, and when they go out of the journey, when they come out of the journey, one of the ways is to immediately write everything you remember, just like we do when we wake up from a dream and we want to recall it. And you just write as much as you recall. Now, I often recommend to people to talk out loud when they do their shamanic journeys and to record themselves. And then those people who try that and then listen to the recording are often really, really surprised by all the very important stuff that they just didn't remember that happened. Okay. Or sometimes, you hear this really wise sentence and you remember the gist of it, but you can't remember the exact wording. And all these things are just examples for how tricky it is to remember a lot of what we're doing. So it's another good thing to do, really. Sometimes when you do your inner work out loud, for some people it works, then you can record it, which is really good for many, many other reasons. And then after you record it, you can write what you remember. But you also have the recording if, for example, you suddenly feel that you've completely forgotten something, okay? Or for some reason you want to hear it more exactly. So that's just a suggestion for those who feel it might help them. Naturally, we're all living in a time where there are really so many distractions that make it even more difficult to concentrate and to kind of maintain a kind of continuity. We seem to be jumping from thing to thing to thing, and I know it from myself. I have quite a good concentration ability, but this thing about I'm going to write a message to something, and then on the way the telephone rings, and you know how it goes. So journaling also really helps maintain our inner continuity, and that's naturally a very useful thing. Having more of a sense of what leads to what and what requires more attention. For example, yesterday I had this idea of some really important work that it would be wonderful if I did. Now, if I didn't write it down and I had all these distractions happening, there's a very good chance that I just wouldn't remember that I had this wonderful idea, and I would just, wouldn't do the work. So that's just one example for that. Now, what I also notice is that the more our work deepens, it becomes even more and more vital to do the journaling and writing. Both, as I said, to keep the continuity and to remember very important things, but also it allows us to reread, and the importance of rereading what we've done, again, is something that we need to dive into a little bit more. First of all, of course, there is the ability to see our own development as it occurs, to observe the movement, to reread stuff from 20, 30 years ago or from last year, and to suddenly understand, you know, how we came from there to here, or suddenly there is a connection that's being made that just wouldn't be made if we didn't read back to what we wrote before. So there is the reading back years and years back, which is really, really important. And I'll give an example of that in a second. And there is reading a little bit back, which is also extremely important. I'll give examples for the two things. First of all, reading what happened years and years ago. For example, many, many years ago, and I'm talking many years ago, I had a dream. I immediately knew that it was a very important dream, but my understanding of it was very minimal. Again, I knew this was one of the big ones, one of the ones that I really want to understand as deeply as possible. It was really fascinating and mysterious in so many ways. But I think it might have been, I don't know, something between 10 and 15 years ago. I have to check when I dreamt it. But I swear to you, I worked on this dream every once in a while, because it was one of those dreams that I do remember. It was so important that I never forgot it. And it used to come up once in every few months, or once a year or 2 years. And I would think about it again and work about it again and go back to read the original again and see if I really remembered it correctly, and so on and so forth. But only, I think, in the past month or so, do I really, really understand the importance of that dream. But the fact that I didn't understand it so many years ago doesn't mean that working on it and journaling about it didn't help me get from there to here, to the time when I'm now reading it and working on it again, maybe the 30th time perhaps, and suddenly really understanding the whole idea behind it and how it shaped my life. Okay. And if I didn't write it down and work on it more than one time, I may have missed, I could have missed it. So that is mainly regarding reading years back. But little by little, I also discovered something that, for me, it took quite a while to understand. And in this series, I'm trying to give my point of view on what makes our inner work, so that for people who are listening now and maybe listening in the future, things will be easier, and you can just have a few shortcuts. So there is this thing that has also become like a ritual for me, and that is, for example, I sit down to write in my journal. And, I may write a while, and then I will go back a few days backwards and read what I wrote yesterday or 3 days ago. Again, it's amazing how much we forget, even if it was, important stuff. And it's amazing how nourishing it is to go back to it. And suddenly all sorts of things that you couldn't figure out the first time you wrote it down suddenly click together. So it really makes the inner work so much more effective that, you know, I wonder how I didn't figure it out 20 years ago and why it took me so long to start doing it in a regular way. So this is also a very strong recommendation. Now, another important thing to remember is that when we do all these things that we discussed, there are many, many more, how would I say, pieces of information for our loving detective, as some of you know, I call this. It can be a part of us, but it can also be kind of a way we learn to function as a kind of loving detective or sensitive spy or sacred scientist, or I have all sorts of other phrases for it. So it's kind of being a kind of loving detective that is working on our mysteries, our secrets, finding our way. And when we do this, all the stuff that we've been talking about, the clues just rise to the surface so much more quickly. And our loving detective begins to connect the dots much more efficiently. Okay, so that's another good reason to do it. Another thing that I've mentioned, but I want to mention again, is that I meet so many people who do work, and I remember who they were 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but they don't remember. Okay, so for example, I know a person who's done some work and has progressed, and he's now a much better person than he used to be in so many ways, but he doesn't remember how stuck and how desperate and how sad and how manipulative and how all sorts of things he used to be. So why is it important to remember what we were before? I think, again, it's vital because, for example, if you notice the changes, and there are changes for the better, it gives you so much strength to continue the work and to do more of it, and to, you know, to have more and more faith in yourself and in the path you're walking. And this is, again, it's so important because people just lose faith so very often. And if you see what happened to you, because you read in your journal and you see that in 1993 you were a miserable wretch and today you're not, you say, wow, okay, I did something here. And again, people forget. It's amazing to see. Another thing that I recommend, and you know, you can try it and see if it works for you too, is whether you write a journal on your computer, or whether you have a nice little book which you write in a different way. I really recommend working in a way that makes it possible for you to add later thoughts and ideas in a way that works for you. So when you work on a computer, it could be a little simpler. You can add, you know, things like, how do you call them? You know, little notes underneath. I forget the word in English. Or you can add in parentheses in the text, you know, for example, for me, many times I reread section that I wrote 3 years ago, and suddenly I make a new connection, or I have a new idea for future work or anything that comes up for me, and I write it inside the text, something like 16th of November 2020. I rereading it now, I understand that, ta, 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 ta. So it's very easy to discern it from the old text. Okay, so there can be all sorts of ideas on how to do that. But that really adds, because you can, really rework it as you reread it. If you handwrite, and you have some kind of book you write in or something like that, you could consider leaving an empty page, writing only on the right or the left side of the pages, and then you always have an empty page to write additional things that you figure out when you reread the text. And of course, you can figure out all sorts of other ways to do it. Another thing, for those of you who are kind of very, very into things like that, I didn't manage it for many years, but there were times when I did an index, okay? Because again, it made it so much easier to find out, for example, things that are like recurring motifs in my development. For example, perhaps in my dreams and journeys or poems that I wrote or whatever, there is a recurring motif of, I'm inventing it right now, a light above the trees or something like that, okay? So I used to have this little index, which would make it very much easier for me to locate all the places where this happened and reread them much easier. But of course, that's, I didn't manage to stick with that. So, but you could try. Okay, we're going to end this soon, but a few more things. What I find out is that each time we rework the material, whether it's something that we wrote this morning and we're reading it tonight, or something that we wrote a few months ago or 10 years ago, it's as if each round of work brings forth more fruit, more connections, more insight. And again, it makes us more and more experts of ourselves. Okay, because we see the process, because we see the recurring motifs, because we see symbols coming back after years, for all sorts of reasons, and simply because we put in the work, the effort. So we become real experts of ourselves, and this is a continual process. And when we become more experts of our own path, then we can also figure out how to continue in a much more efficient way. Everything works better when you become an expert of yourself and you understand yourself more and more, and you can sort of use things that you realized about yourself in the past, what worked, what didn't work, and you use that in order to continue on your path and your process. Okay, and of course, once again, each person has an individual way of doing stuff, and there's the need to discover what works for us and what doesn't. So these are only suggestions. But perhaps before I check what somebody wrote in the chat, another last thing I want to mention, and that is that if you feel resistant to journaling, or to anything else that you believe might be beneficent for you, one of the best things to do is figure out who are the inner selves, the inner parts in you that are against it, and talk to them. Learn how to disidentify with these parts while you're accepting them exactly as they are. And there are very good ways to do this work. And then once you realize who's against it, who's resisting it, and who thinks it's a bad idea, and doing the work, then try to start again the work of journaling or whatever it is you feel that would benefit you on your way. Okay, let's see what's in the chat. Okay, so I'll translate. Whenever I'm about to have a chat with an inner part or an inner self, I write a description or I don't know exactly what is meant here, but probably how I think it's how I'm feeling probably. It helps me to recall what the situation was when this self came up, what the trigger was, and it also helps me write things that are not voice dialogue, but also contain historic and personal and psychological insights. So it gives me a much wider view, but I don't have a separate journal. So thanks a lot for that. So again, there is no one right way to do it. What I little by little found that worked best for me was having one journal in which I do the voice dialogue work, and I do all the types of work that I do and discover through my Flowering Diamond Way. But I also use it for writing down dreams and working on them, writing down shamanic journeys and working on them, writing all sorts of thoughts, insights, whatever. So for in my case, I discovered that that works best. But of course, again, there isn't one way that is correct. It really, really helps me see how everything connects together. And also not lose myself in too many, books and pieces of paper that are kind of all around the place, like sometimes used to happen for me in the past. Okay, we're reaching the end of our meeting. It's a short one, as I told you. And unless anybody wants to add any comment or thoughts in the chat or some other way, we'll finish now. And thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure to be with you. And see you probably next Monday. Bye-bye. Thank you all.